Hey everybody, my name is Spenser Starke. I'm a game designer and producer here in Los Angeles, and I'm joined today by some incredible designers that I can't wait to introduce you to. Banana, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Banana Chen. I am the owner and co-founder of a small box board game and RPG publishing company. And I also write and design a whole bunch of games on the side.
Jeeyon, let's go over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jeeyon Shim. I'm an outdoor educator and game designer. I used to work full-time teaching kids wilderness survival skills, but I'm soon going to be a student and transitioning into game design full-time.
Awesome, and Sharang.
And I'm Sharang Biswas. I'm an independent game designer, writer, and artist. I mainly work freelance, and I am also currently an artist in residence at the Museum of the Moving Image, and I'm on the faculty at Fordham University.
Amazing. And I'm Spenser Starke. I am the designer of Icarus and Kids on Brooms, co-designer of Kids on Brooms, and also the designer of the recently released Alice is Missing. And I'm so honored to have all of you here today. I was telling you before the panel started, or the round table rather started, that I was really looking to bring in people that are doing things in game design that I think are exciting and that are pushing the boundaries and that are exploring the space, I think, in ways that other people might, that isn't always at the forethought of some people when they go to make an RPG, right? Like what I value in games that I make is always trying to push the boundaries, always trying to find what's new, what's different, what's unique, and all of you here are doing that. So I'm so honored and excited to have you. So the topic of this discussion, I guess, just to start it off with, and knowing us, will veer into many varied corners and conversations. But to just start us off, like I want to talk about how we make games from scratch. Like, how do we start with nothing? I think that for people that are looking to get into game design, that are looking to start, that's often the most intimidating part. Is like, how do you even get started in this whole thing? What do you do first? Does anybody have anything that does anybody have any rituals or any sort of like techniques that they use to like find the next project that they're working on, that how to get into it specifically?
My first thing would be, so this is not exactly answering your question. The first question is, if you are new to doing games, if you have not made a game before, my first piece of advice would always be to start small. I think people's inclination would be, I must write a 400-page tome with like 200 pages of lore. And what I've seen is write a lot of the lore, and then they write none of the game, and then they get tired because they've not written none of the game, and then they stop, right? I would always say there are many, many small games out there. I would play some of those and see, yes, it is very possible to have very wonderful, very cool, very artistically fulfilling role-playing games that are 5 pages long or even 1 page long, right? So I would say start small would be the first step. Think about what because you're going to feel better about accomplishing something, even if it's tiny, and you'll feel the energy to make more, rather than like, let me like take 3 months to write this enormous cyberpunk setting,
Yeah, well, and I feel like too, for me, like I get the most daunting for me is not like getting into it necessarily. It's like once I'm in it, it's getting past the point where my brain stops enjoying it in some regard, and like I'm forced to like face what I've made and go, is this good? Is it bad? I don't know anymore. I get lost in the wilderness there sometimes, and so that often for me is the hardest. So I feel you on that, like making small stuff that you can get through, that you can design fully in like a week or something. Really helps. What are you, Banana? Anything from you that you like, any techniques that you use when you jump into making a game?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what all of you are saying with like, making small games to start. I think it's also important to just, set things aside if you don't like it. Like once you've made the thing and you're just like, oh, actually, I don't like this anymore and I'm not interested in, this thing anymore. It's okay to just like put it aside. Like I have countless projects where I've like started and I was just like, wait a second, this makes no sense. Even though I've spent like X amount of hours on this already, I'm not going to go back to this until like, maybe later on when I'm ready to go back to it. But for me, like a lot of the games that I write or like a lot of the inspiration points are from, TV and movies and podcasts or music. So it's a lot of like consuming other media.
Yeah, totally. John, anything from your side of the world, like anything that from your like area that you work from, like
Yeah.
how do you approach stuff?
I feel like I could say some stuff to tie together what all three of you have said. I think recognizing your own patterns and your own strengths is really crucial to approaching any project, but especially a creative one. So it's interesting because Sharang's saying like start small, and that's my comfort zone. So depending on where you are in your arc of making games, like this year for me is going to be pushing myself a lot to write bigger volumes, more complicated mechanics that have lore in them at all. And recognizing kind of where you're at and how to continue to push that boundary. It's really important to constantly stretch your own horizons. And that starts with recognizing what you're good at and what's still a challenge for you. And I think a lot of that comes from, just finding inspiration outside of games is a really huge component for me as well. Like Banana was saying, I often don't make games that are inspired by other games. I make games that are inspired either by my time outdoors or reading other media or watching something, almost literally anything but another game.
Yeah,
because I feel artists can often get in this very insular cycle of only referring to other art in their field, right? And that happens a lot with other art form, right? Like painting sometimes are only comprehensible if you know the entire history of painting. I'm not saying all of this like this, but that happens a lot, right? And I think that's a not the best way to capture a diverse audience, because you want, if you want a diverse audience, of course, right? You could have different aims for your artistic output, right? But it is a good idea to not only look at other games for two reasons. One, because you don't want it to be impenetrable unless you played all these other games. But two, I think what Banana and Jeeyon are saying are really good. Like referring to other media will make you more innovative. You will think of more unusual. Again, if your aim is to make unusual game, which it might not be, which is valid, but if your aim is to be innovative and your aim is to try something new, I always tell my game design students when we're doing video game design, I'm like, do you just want to make another shooter where you're going to have to work really hard to make something different and stick out? Or do you want to try making a game about, I don't know, cake decorating, right? Or make a game about like tooth realignment where you're an orthodontist or something, right? Like using other media and other life experiences that are different, that you don't have lots of games about. I think that is a very powerful way of going about it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because you can start at that place. And I find myself going to like, when I start the process, I usually either start with an image or with music. And so, or sometimes a combination of both. I'll find a painting that just makes me feel something. And that usually is enough inspiration for me to start a direction. I'll put some text on it and see what feels right as far as like the names, or and sometimes I'll get just inspired by that name or by that piece of music or something like that, and that is what will lead me through the rest of the process, which is fascinating. But in that whole sort of space, like when by looking outside at those pieces that aren't games that are inspiring what I'm working on, I then take that, bring it back in, and then I can look at other games that are doing similar things mechanically and start to figure out how to take those pieces that I think work really well and like graph them on as the support beams, right? So it's like we're making a game about this thing and it's original and unique, but it's utilizing techniques that are tried and true in some way that allow it to be accessible to people that have both played and not played games before, but give it grounding in something. And so that's been really fun to sort of explore, like, how do I take a not as common trope or concept or genre and then find the mechanics that support it.
Yeah.
That's really... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sharang.
No, go ahead, Jian.
I was going to say that's really interesting because when I first started writing games, I drew a lot of inspiration from poetry, and I still continue to. A lot of poetry, when you read it, it's so subjective, it's so internal, but I think one of the reasons why it often translates over easily for me is because the poets I favor tend to evoke very specific emotive and experiential frames of mind in their work. And at their best, I think games do the same thing. And that thing that you were saying, Spenser, about finding the scaffolding almost after the emotional and conceptual core of what you're making is a skill that it takes a little bit of practice, I think, to learn. And I'd be really curious to hear how you came about it that way, because it's sort of backwards from what a lot of other designers I've heard talk about their process speak to.
Yeah, well, when I first started making games, I went in very mechanically minded, right? Like I was like, how do I take? I came in from the mechanic side. It was like, in fact, the very first game, like RPG that I designed was trying to be a bucket, a kitchen sink system, and I learned very quickly that like that wasn't what made me excited. It was useful, but it wasn't evocative, right? So I like about faced and was like, okay, I'm throwing out like being based in some sort of strict mechanics, and I'm going, what do I want players to feel, right? And that's where like Icarus came about. Was like I was having a conversation with Ivan Van Norman, and him and I were talking about Dread and talking about Starcrossed, and these games that really make you feel something viscerally outside of almost outside of the game itself, that somehow impact you outside of that. And so I started with that dice stacking mechanic, which I guess is technically mechanically first, but it was more feeling first, right? I wanted people to feel tension. I wanted there to be like this sort of caution around the table. I wanted people to be standing by the end of the game. I wanted to evoke these kinds of emotions in people as they played, and that was where I started, was identifying that. And similarly with Alice, like I knew I wanted to make a silent game, and I didn't know how, but I knew that was going to restrict the amount of like mechanics that I had at my disposal, because most mechanics, like you have to speak to be able to communicate them. So like that was where I sort of was playing in that world. But in obviously in something like Wait For Me, which is the game that sort of came on my radar that you were working on, Jian, that I fell in love with. It's so amazing. I mean, it's so brilliant on so many levels. But the part that really stuck with me is the fact that it does that thing emotionally that I look for in games, which is like, it makes you look at yourself almost in ways, like it's very meta, right? And that game is very, very meta, purposefully. Do you want to maybe talk about like how you approached that from a meta perspective, and like why you decided to go down that route, and how that, how it changed over the course of its development?
Oh gosh. I suppose I could. I'll admit that I wasn't approaching it that formally.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like really gratified to hear that it's a satisfying meta experience, but it's not necessarily the aim that I was thinking about when I was first putting down the brickwork for the concept with my co-designer, Kevin Culp. I remember, though, thinking a lot about like logistics and circumstances for most people playing this game, which because we were releasing it pretty quickly after conception, and because one of the things I said from the beginning was I don't want to have to deal with any physical assets because I don't understand manufacturing and distribution yet. That's like really out of my comfort zone right now. So how do we create a meaningful experience where the player makes their own physical asset while they're in isolation from quarantine? And everything else kind of fell into place from there. Like Kevin's very interested in time travel narratives. And so we're like, how do we work that in? And I think it's fascinating that so many people are saying what you're saying, where they also had like, in addition to a very visceral emotional experience, kind of like an out of body, like meta experience as well. Cause it came organically out of the design. It's not something that I necessarily intended from the get-go, which maybe I shouldn't say. Maybe I should fake it and have made
No.
But it's true. And I think that's actually...
That's great.
Yeah. And I think it's really nice for people who are getting their start creating to hear that like cool things can happen without you meaning them to. And that's another part of this art form that's really gratifying. Like, I remember feeling that with Jiangshi, Banana, when we were doing that playthrough, actually, the playtest earlier, and just thinking about how many aspects of non-white identity and like lived experience are just written in, like baked in, but would you know it if you weren't white? Like, I don't know. Like, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I'm really interested in hearing Banana speak about Jiangshi, because I feel, unlike the other project we just discussed, that project has a lot of research and historical roots in it. So I'm really interested in how that process was for you with this like research-based, fact-based. Well, vampires are a different fact. Information about food in this time period and stuff, right?
Yeah, we surprisingly also had to do a lot of research on the vampires as well. So Jiangshi is a game that Senfun Lim and I were designing. We had been working on since 2018. And when we first talked about making a game together, we were like, okay, we should just brainstorm, a whole lot of things that we were interested in. And one of those things was a game about, running a Chinese restaurant, because that's something that touched like both of us in our own identities. Our families always used to go to restaurants when we were growing up. And so that's something that was really important to us. But what was also important for us was the immigrant experience in of itself. And so we wanted to capture that in a game. And so initially we wanted to think about like different tools. So we didn't want to use dice. We were like, okay, let's try and use divination tools. So there are these
like that kind of thing.
We were thinking about using Jiao Bei. So there are these red moon blocks, and you throw them. And I think it's like popular in a lot of Taoist divination types of things. And we were thinking, okay, let's try to use that. Oh, wait a second. It only gives you 3 outcomes at a time. It doesn't work very well, and they're very clunky and they're very expensive. And also, we don't want to offend anyone using these. So we switched over to dice. And so we started using dice. But then from there, we still, kept in mind the whole idea of the immigrant experience. And we were just like building around this, this whole restaurant theme with, the different phases of the day and how the character sheet works. And we were just thinking about all of these things because it wasn't just about oh, sorry, did I freeze for a second?
Very good.
Okay, I wasn't, thanks. We weren't trying to just think about the game itself. We were also trying to think about how would this represent us and our culture, and making sure that we did, that justice, basically. And we realized soon after, when we were doing playtesting and stuff, that it wasn't resonating with just a Chinese American audience. It was also resonating with other immigrant players or people from immigrant families. So I think it was a lot to do with us doing a lot of the research, but it was also just thinking about putting that immigrant experience first and baking it into the mechanics, and trying to tell that story. So it was a bit of work. I'll say that.
interesting because Spencer, you were just talking about this idea of it's very formalist design. If you think of like Huneke, Leblanc, and Zubek, right, who are like, think about the aesthetic you're trying to achieve and the mechanics that lead to that, right? But Banana is talking about this like more expansive view of I am making a game and how does this interact like sociologically, sort of, right? Or how does this interact with the canon of games and the thought process about the immigrant experience? I think that's a different way to tackle an artistic impulse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's something that I think we're living in a time where that we have things like Kickstarter. I mean, the game raised what? How much did it raise, Banana?
It was $100,000,
$100,000, and so like that is incredible, right? So to look at that, like for these niche kind of games that we're talking about, right? Being able to like raise that kind of money, real money on Kickstarter, because people are identifying with the specifically in that one, and I not being somebody who it comes from the culture that it is portraying, or that it is that's based in. Like I don't have a shared lived experience in that, but me playing that game, it's appealing to me because I get the opportunity to see from you and from from your team, like how that experience, what that experience is like. And I think for people that have been underrepresented, like it's a cool experience to see that representation actually brought to the table. Like you're saying, it's so steeped in the culture of in white people culture, right? Like it's very steeped in that culture, and that is the default. So giving people that opportunity is so cool. I mean, and it resonates, right? Like we see that it resonates.
I'd like
so
to
there's no excuse.
Because I feel what I've noticed recently is that because we're having a lot of discussion in the game space, in the media space in general, about being respectful to other cultures, which I think is essential and important. But I think a lot of people are taking this as a cue to be like, oh, this means I can never play a game that's talking about an experience that I have not had, right? I have seen a lot of people, like I do pro DMing for Magpie Games, for example, and I have to be like, oh, I want to play, I was running Urban Shadows, which is the whole premise of Urban Shadows about diverse cities, and I had a player being like, I want to play a Haitian Creole woman, but I'm scared, and I'm like, I'm not here to police you on like no game designer who is from a marginalized community is there to tell you you are never allowed to play outside your experience, right? In fact, it's the opposite. I'm sure Banana Chan made Jiangshi not just for Chinese immigrants to play, right? It's a valid thing to do. It is very valid to make a game just for Chinese immigrants to play, but I know for a fact, because I was on the team, Banana Chan to make the game just for Chinese immigrants, right? So I want to put this out there that James Mendez Hode once made a really good statement saying like, the point is for you to play respectfully, thinking that these are, keeping in mind that these are real experiences and people. But apart from that, when I make a game about playing in gay clubs, I do not need my players to read discipline and punishment, read Foucault and learn about the history of sexuality before playing my game. Like, I don't need you to do that. So I feel I want to say this because I feel a lot of people are scared. Like, I don't want to play Jiangshi because it's about Chinese people and I'm not Chinese and I don't want to disrespect. I'm like, no. Banana made this game for everyone. Play it and just keep in mind you're portraying something that's important, and don't try and not be prejudiced and try and
right.
Yeah, we have a whole section there.
Yeah, I think there's a real slant toward values of purity in art right now, and especially niche art. And this is something that you see pretty frequently in communities of marginalized people that do a lot of creation. And it comes from a place of like wanting to avoid hurt, both like hurt that you might take on yourself and hurt that you might incur to others. But there is no such thing as purity in art, right? There's good faith and good intention, and that's really the best that anyone can work with. And also, like, there's boundaries that you can draw around yourself as a creator, like just to bring things back to kind of the conversation about the process of creating games. Jiangshi is going to be the first time I ever write explicitly about race in any game that I've written for anybody. But it's not because I don't think about it or I don't have ideas about race. It's because for me, it's like a self-protective thing. Because as much as I know that most people approaching any game anyone writes are going to do their best, I just don't want to open myself up to that. However, I think there are ways that you can discuss core elements in a way that do transcend like lines and identity. And actually, Sharang, it's funny because we became friends, but two of the games that like inspired me a lot before I ever talked to you in person, I think, were your games. There was Verdure and Feast, and both of them I just thought were the coolest things. And I feel like they both approach like this question of what does it feel like to be someone with colonialized identity, with marginalized identity in a white supremacist framework, both from like a collective standpoint as well as an isolated, solitary standpoint. And I remember thinking like, wow, this person managed to talk about race so well without talking about race. And so there's ways you can do it, right? There's ways you can speak to your core self without compromising vulnerability if you don't want to. And I think that's important to remember if you're creating as well.
Well, and I think that RPGs are an opportunity for us to play people that we're not, right? Like that's when we RP as characters, we're very rarely playing us. But a lot of times we're playing fantasy characters. And so, I mean, in the, not us specifically, because I know we play a lot of different games, but like in general, the RPG community tends to play a lot of fantasy characters. And so that removes that a little bit. And I think by making people, like not forcing people, but like, I guess allowing, but kind of forcing people to play characters that are outside of what they normally choose, we're allowing them the opportunity to see, to empathize, right? To see things from somebody else's, like one of the examples that I've run into in the playtesting for Alice is that one of the characters, Julia, is the secret girlfriend. She's Alice's secret girlfriend. And she is inherently a gay relationship, and so there were people that were hesitant to step into that role, which is okay. And if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you don't need to. But there are people that chose it, knowing that they weren't like, that they had never played a character with a sexuality that was different than theirs before. And by the end, to have them in tears about this woman that they loved, having being male but playing female and playing gay, or female playing somebody who they're straight and they're playing somebody who's not, like it's interesting to watch the way that people's empathy can change just through experiencing a different perspective through role play. And it's not like a fix. It's not the way we should be approaching like race, discussions about race, but like it is something that's fascinating to sort of put people in that position and allow them to explore spaces respectfully and in a way that is I think important to the conversation specifically here in America, that's like the melting pot, right?
I know this is slightly off topic and we're running a little low on time.
I know.
It is important for players and designers to think about this fact that Bo Ruberg wrote very eloquently about this idea of this controversy about empathy in games recently, where by playing a queer character, by playing a Chinese immigrant grandmother, that doesn't mean you have had this experience, right? It doesn't mean you can empathize really. It means you had a glimpse through an art form of what this author is trying to tell you. So I want to make that clear. Like you shouldn't say, "Oh, I played this, so I know what it's like to be black."
Yeah, exactly.
There is an incredible. I know we're at a minute, but there's an incredible essay called, I think, "The Case Against Empathy," which is really fascinating because it talks about how empathy is by definition an insulating solitary experience.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, and I think as a creator, it's an important essay to read because with games especially, it's about communal experience, even if it's a solo game, which is very interesting.
Yeah. I want to touch on one more thing before we end as well. Sorry, I know that we're at time, but Austin Knight and I, we've been discussing about like the whole idea of empathy in games as well. And Austin and I were working on a game together right now, which talks about like, so they're a therapist in their day job, and we're working on a game together. But we talk about like how empathy works in games, and a lot of the time, what we're our, I guess, like biggest takeaway is that when we're playing games, when we're role playing, we learn more about ourselves than we learn about other people. And that actually sort of builds a foundation for us to sort of understand how, like, you know, maybe it sort of does bridge something between, you know, how we communicate with others, or, you know, something like that. But the biggest takeaway is that, like, you know, we are learning a lot, but not necessarily about other people, but more so about ourselves.
About who we are through that experience. It's fascinating.
Right, yeah.
Absolutely fascinating.
If we want it to happen, and if we want to allow ourselves to learn more about ourselves,
if we choose to engage in that way,
it is a tool.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Amazing. Well, we have a red timer blinking at us. I'm so sad because I feel like we literally just started talking, and this is all like such important stuff. We'll just get on a Zoom chat later, and we'll all just talk about stuff. But no, thank you all so much for joining me, and it's truly an honor to talk with all of you, and to pick your brains about game design, and just about, I think game design is one of those fields where it reaches out to so many other areas of our life, like so many other areas of my life impact game design, and that's just sort of the byproduct. And so it's amazing to hear, all of you talk about the way in which you approach games, and how you take something from nothing, how you make something from nothing, and how that lived experience sort of impacts the way in which you approach this medium. So, but unfortunately we're out of time. So I just want to go around one more time, have all of us say where you can find us online. My name is Spenser Starke. You can find me at Spenser Starke, SpenserStarke. That was not right. That wasn't a letter. Starke. There's the letter. On Twitter and Instagram and everywhere. Banana, let's jump over to you.
Thanks again for having me. My name is Banana Chan. You can find me on Twitter at Banana Chan Games, BANANACHANGAMES. And you can also find my company, Game in a Curry, at Game in a Curry.
Great. Chan.
Oh, me? Sorry. My name is Jeeyon Shim. On social media, I'm easy to find on Twitter, my handle is JeeyonShim. If you want access to my games, including a lot of games that aren't up on my itch store or elsewhere, my Patreon is the best place. My Patreon handle is also my name, JeeyonShim.
You guys are so much better at letters than I am. I just could. There's so many letters. All right.
I'm Sharang Biswas, and you can see the spelling of my name on your screen right now. Handle. Spell it out. And I have some of my games on my itch, which is Astrolingus, think Star-Tongued. And a lot of my games are commissioned, so you will never see them, sorry. And my website's linked from my Twitter, and that's where I make all my game announcements. So do check it out.
Do a quick shout out on your Kickstarter.
Yeah, exactly. My Cleo Yansu Davis now kickstarting a anthology of sex-themed interactive fiction game with a bunch of really well-known authors and game designers. We're launching our preview next week, so do check it out. It's going to be called Strange Lusts, Strange Loves, an anthology of erotic interactive fiction, and we're partnering with Strange Horizons magazine for this.
Amazing.
Very cool.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.